agreement yet between Labour and the federal government as negotiations over minimum wage implementation enters the third day.
Labour and Employment Minister Chris Ngige says a subcommittee of the negotiating team has been mandated to look through some documents and come up with agreeable figures. The subcommittee is to feed the larger house by 7 this evening, after which deliberations are built to be concluded.
There are indications that both parties have made some concessions, though they are yet to reach a truce. TVC News gathers that Labour has shifted ground from 29% consequential adjustment demand for grade levels 7 to 14 to 25% and 20% from 24% for those on levels 15 to 17. The government says it is not feasible. Joining us now is TVC News senior researcher Cyril Abako. Cyril, good morning.
Very good morning to you, Veronica.
Good to have you here. Now, from reports reaching us, it seems Labour has decided to shift grounds from its initial percentage increment for
29% to 25%.
29 to 25%. But what do you make of this adjustment? Have we really moved? Because Chris Ngige, as the Labour Minister, has said that the increment that Labour is asking for will grind the economy to a halt. Has anything really changed with these adjustments?
Well, I think it's the negotiators' language. You know, they came out of that meeting at about 2 a.m. this morning. I was monitoring what was going on. They came out and they kept on saying, we're close to a deal, we're close to a deal. You know, we've made reasonable progress. When it's not every time Labour and government come out and say we've made progress. Sometimes they come out and they don't even want to say anything. You know, there's still fire on the mountain. But the fact that they have reached common grounds, you know, where they can say, okay, let's get a subcommittee to go and work out something and come back by 7 p.m. It was a good thing that the strike was averted in the first place. It was a good thing that they could continue to talk, which is the most important part. And for the fact that they've come to a point where talks can still continue, it shows that it may just be a matter of hours before this whole minimum wage brouhaha was put, you know, to bed, and then the nation could move forward.
Okay, so in all of this now, we have a meeting at 7 p.m. today, and the subcommittee is expected to bring up its recommendations. Now, do you expect Labour to shift its ground further, since the federal government says it's not feasible to pay what the Labour's demand?
It is very likely. It is very likely. What we have often seen, you know, even the 30,000 naira that was agreed for levels 1 to 7 or so, it was pegged initially at 100, later maybe perhaps, you know, I mean, it was a far cry from 30, but they got to it.
I think 95,
of course, yeah,
minimum wage.
You know, I mean, 95 to 30, that's quite a far cry. What I foresee, it could be whittled down further. If that was agreeable, they wouldn't have come out to say they were going to still meet at 7 p.m. So I think it will come down a little more. But what I want to see is a situation where the process, the negotiating process by which, you know, that brings them to the final figures could be sustained or could give us a system for further talks. And then we must come to the proper minimum wage cycle. 5 years installments, you know, we have a new minimum wage and then it is sorted out in time.
But with this statements like grinding the economy to a halt, because we already see our budget, 70% of it is used for payment of salaries, and 30% is just what is used for capital expenditure and the likes. Can we really have a structure that works? Wouldn't we continue to see these adjustments here and there, because the economy is saying something different?
No, you see, the Nigerian economy is lopsided. It has a lot of challenges and problems. Look at minimum wage. It is basically between government and labor. There are a lot of arguments around that. In the first instance, in a proper federal system, why should the federal government be the one talking about minimum wage?
Who should?
It should be the states. And then again, if you have a proper, at the National Economic Summit that held some weeks ago, they were talking about a competitive private sector-led economy. You can't have an economy where government is the highest employer of labor. It means productivity itself is the first casualty. So what you find is an abnormal situation in which we have an abnormal solution that has become the norm. So how can we regulate ourselves out of this? It's a long-term dream that we have to, you know, it will take time. It will take time. Process. And so these workers know that government is putting more emphasis on paying salaries than on doing projects. They might as well go for the lion's share of those salaries. That's the problem. Right. Because you find that even in those, these same workers are part of the recurrent expenses. They're also part of capital expenses. You find that every year recurrent expenditure is executed to 100% perfection. But the one for capital expenditure, the money is either in the pipeline or it didn't. So this is the issue. If there is sincerity from the source, there will be also proper, you also get better results.
All right. Now, when you look at the changes that are being brought into the new copyright bill that has been asked to be accepted to, what do you make of it? How important or critical are these changes?
It is important. It is also critical because the law seeks to drive inclusion. Inclusion for people who are visually impaired. If you break down the categories of people who have eye issues, within that bracket, they come to about 3.6 to 4 million. That's quite a sizable chunk of the Nigerian population, And so nobody should be left behind.
Yes.
It's been a slow walk from when the treaty was adopted, when Nigeria also submitted its own instrument and so on. It should have come much earlier, but it's never lost in the day. Once that bill is passed, it will seek to help these people, gain access to knowledge, which will give them power. The blind in our society should not be reduced to begging. Shouldn't be yes. They shouldn't be reduced to certain levels of dependence. Knowledge is power, and so as many who have knowledge or who can acquire knowledge independently with use of technology will be able to not just acquire knowledge but to reproduce it and use it to contribute to society. Right. And so in the end, everybody benefits. I think not depriving them of a law like this should be considered a crime, if you know what I mean. Yes, should be considered unacceptable. And so the earlier we pass the bill, the better. I'm happy that it is being brought up. I think last week also there was the celebration of the White Cane Day also. Yeah. So I think moments like this give us give advocacy impetus, give advocacy the required feeling to deepen the discourse, to deepen the call for the passage of laws and instruments that will enable people, not just the blind, really, but people who are disabled in one way or the other, to also have a voice in society.
Are you concerned about implementation? While this is a laudable situation, it's a laudable project, there's this problem that we always have in this country, implementation. Are you concerned about that?
Well, some will say we shouldn't jump the beach before we get there. Yes, we always have these issues, and it can really be bad. But the fact is that, let's have a law so that we know where to take the discussion from.
Yes, because still following where he is coming from, because some have said that, will this really give access to this? Does it translate to having access? Because we also had a bill at the time that had to do with disability. Yeah. Yet we are still seeing that implementation has been, the percentage of implementation is not up to 10%. And so how confident are we that this time around, when it comes to access to quality education, books and all of that, this will really translate to that?
Well, what this basically comes to is the fact that once the bill is passed, we would expect stakeholders, people who, one way or the other, advocates, civil society groups, the Ministry of Education, for instance, to ensure that all the paraphernalia, everything we will require to push this through is done. First of all, let us commend government for even having a political will to push this up to this point, and and then stay on it. The fact is that sometimes social leverages don't get thrown at you. You work for it, you make advocacy, you continue to talk about it, and so if once the law is passed, we know that there's a basis for having a continued discussion. There's a ground to stand upon and to make the case. So this is here is what's going to happen. When you pass the law, we must ensure that when the budget is being prepared, for instance, for next year or for when we have what is going to go for education, these special needs cases must be specifically taken as heads, so that we know where to take the case to when that case has to be made.
Okay, but
where you don't have such specifications, it becomes difficult to track. It's vague. It's there, but there's nothing.
And
really
that has always been our issue.
It has always been there. But so we hope that the law, will also ensure that some of those nebulous and vague aspects of these things are taken care of.
What about the bottlenecks in the civil service? These are people with disability, visual, and in all ways. Now, if this bill is passed and we are supposed to implement it, what happens to the civil service that has to put this in place? Like you mentioned, the Ministry of Education now, and the civil service, how a lot of processes they have to go through and the bottlenecks involved in it, and these people might not just have the strength to go through this.
No, there's no need to paint it any other way. The fact is that if we began the process in 2013, it's really the shame of a nation that 6 years later we're talking about the discussion hasn't really gone away from intentions.
Yes.
A bill is a mere intention. But the moment that law is passed, the quantum of political will that we used to pursue it will not determine the momentum with which, what I expect the executive of government to do is that you have a bill on the floor of the House of Reps or Senate. Your homework doesn't just end with preparing a bill. That's, yes, because it's come from your own arm. All other things you need to give that law safe landing once it is passed should also be put in place.
All right.
It shouldn't be a knee-jerk approach.
Okay.
But hopefully let the law be passed. I think that is the fundamental. Yes, let that law be passed. That is the first thing that should be done.
Well, some have said that despite these adjustments being made to the bill, it doesn't really include some certain aspects when it comes to the digital space. It doesn't really reflect the changes we are seeing on the digital space, and so it is not encompassing.
Well, we have called it domestication. It's an international instrument, but we are domesticating it. And so eventually, what happens is that perhaps for reasons of national development goals and in terms of what we can achieve realistically, they are domesticating it in that. But what I think we should be doing is the fact that the Constitution, if we even go back to basics, talks about fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy, where every Nigerian is, so to say, supposed to be covered by a right to education. And that is supposed to be the responsibility of the state to provide them education. And so in that regard, nobody should be left behind. We're in an era where people in this bracket, are supposed to be given brailles, are supposed to be given audio books, are supposed to some of them are simply print disabled. There are different categories.
Yes.
And so the government owes it to everybody that law should affect. If you look at from when the Marrakesh Treaty came in, there are about 87 countries that are part of the whole thing so far, and 60 countries that have actually contracted. Now the issue is that what Nigeria makes out of Marrakesh, you can only make so much out of Marrakesh as you want to make. Okay, there's an international instrument. Whatever you achieve is only how far you are willing to go. And so it behoves us. We can actually take the lead. We can actually take the lead in being the country that made the most of that law. But if we don't, we can only have ourselves to blame. Where the world is today, we talk about the knowledge economy, and so on. There is need for us to cash in on that value chain. To make sure that our people, whether they are deaf, they are blind, they are differently able, whoever is affected, has equal access both to receive education and to give back to society. The reality is that when we pass it is not only those people that gain. As a society, we stand to gain more collectively than they gain individually. All right,
Cyril, we have to leave it at this point. Cyril Abako, Senior Researcher, thank you for your time.
Pleasure.